Hello everyone, welcome back to On the Fly. Today we're recapping day 4 of the World Junior Championship happening in Ottawa, Ontario. So we'll hop right into it today with the scores from today's games, starting with a 7-5 victory for Sweden over Switzerland. And this was kind of a wild game, and one of those games that the final score isn't really something you can look at and say, yeah, that's what happened in this game, because Sweden had a very rough start to this game, yet they found themselves up, scoring 3 goals on 5 shots in the first period. And it was one of those games where Sweden just seemed to have that finishing touch the entire game, all the way to the third period where they were up 7-2. And all of a sudden, the Swiss, lots of penalties here and there. I think it was somewhere around the range of 18 minutes of penalties. At some point, it's just an ugly game, and that's exactly what happened here. Switzerland crawled back to 7-5 as your final, but each goal, the fifth goal for Switzerland, I think, was scored with 12 seconds left or 13 seconds left. So really a 7-4 game, but still, Sweden by a long shot in this game did not outplay Switzerland. And that's kind of the storyline of today, is the favorites having some problems in this tournament. You think back to the preview video, to the prediction video that we made, to day 1, to day 2, to day 3, and now to day 4, where we've been saying this entire time, there's the big 3 at this tournament, right? With Canada, US, and Sweden. Sweden played a terrible game today. They didn't look good against Kazakhstan. They looked okay against Slovakia. The US looked okay against Germany. Rough start, good finish against Germany. Latvia, they looked okay against Latvia. And then today, we'll get to them in a couple minutes here, they lost to Finland. To Canada, let's talk about Canada. Real good start against Finland. Played really well. Looked like it was going to be a team that was going to be able to contend at this tournament. Next game, loses to Latvia in a shootout, 3-2. And then they play today, and we'll get to them in a little bit, outplayed again. So the question mark still remains. What's up with this tournament? Why does nothing make sense? Please help me with this. 7-5 is your final in this one. But really, Switzerland, very well could have won this game, probably should have won this game. But here we are, 7-5 is your final in this one. And, both sides played well at moments. Both sides played terribly at moments. And now it's just a matter of what comes next for these two teams. Sweden's got a big game on New Year's Eve where they will look to obviously, win the Group B. And that's exactly where they put themselves in, is in a must-win game, basically, against one of the better teams in the group, against the Czechs, right? And the Czechs have looked probably the only team in my eyes at this tournament that actually have made some sense in here. And they've been looking better and better and better throughout this tournament. So, the question remains, are they the best team in Group B? Time will tell for Sweden. We'll finally get to see them with a real test with the Czechs. And I think it's going to be a firework game on New Year's Eve, right before, the big one with Canada and the US, which at this point, I don't even know what that one's going to entail, because you have two teams that have played pretty poorly to start this tournament, and now you're going to see the fireworks fly on New Year's Eve. So that's the first game of the day. 7-5 is your final. Now let's talk about the second game of the day, which is, you saw off the open, the game winner, Finland beating the US 4-3 in overtime. And this game was, I don't know, right? It's Finland outplayed the US, and I can't believe I'm saying that, but Finland outplayed the US. It wasn't like Finland beat the US, like I sort of mentioned it, right? Yeah, in yesterday's preview, in the projection video, my expectation was Finland, if they were going to beat the US, they would beat them. I didn't expect them to control the pace of play for pretty much the entire 60 minutes. And it was a game to remember for Finland in this one, where, they led the game going into the third period, a tying goal for the US. And then from there, that was the last we saw of the US in the positive column. Every single moment from there on in was Finland. This entire game was just Finland playing their game and playing it better than the US. And the US was really struggling to get stuff going, and it was surprising. And, we talk about sort of favorites coming into this tournament, right? And you don't base that off anything else other than on paper. And certain teams play well together, certain teams don't. And this game was just an example of how hockey is such a unique sport that there's no guarantees, right? It's not basketball, it's not baseball, where, 95% of the time, the better team is going to win. This is hockey where every game's a toss-up. You have teams like Latvia upsetting Canada. Despite Canada getting 55 shots on net, Latvia still win, right? It's the fact that one player can steal a game for you, but an entire team can outplay another team that's better than on them on paper, but yet still, we have games like this where 4-3 your final for Finland in overtime against the U.S. And the one other thing I want to say on this game before we move on is I'd never seen the U.S. back down before. And that was one that, for me, was very interesting. And you saw it in the final 5 minutes of that game where the U.S. doesn't play defensive hockey. And it's not a knock on them, right? They're an offensive team. Their roster is designed to play offense. They were playing defense in that game, in that final 5 minutes, where they weren't attacking at all. They basically gave Finland the opportunity to break into their zone every single time, dumping pucks into the other zone. And it's just, it's weird, right? This tournament has just been a weird tournament where, and that's why it's the most wonderful time of the year, right? We always talk about it. This is the best tournament to watch in the IIHF because it's the most competitive. And each and every year, it's anyone can take it. Like this game, right, where we have Finland, who wasn't really considered to be a favorite. Don't get me wrong, the Finland's play a very solid structured game, and that's why they won today. But they also dominated play from start to finish, which is one of the craziest parts about this game was, Finland's good team, played structured hockey. That's why they normally beat the U.S. if they're going to beat the U.S., but they actually controlled the pace of play today, putting the U.S. on their heels, which for me is one of the biggest things I'm looking towards for that New Year's Eve game when they'll play Canada. What's going to happen in that one, right? Where who's going to set the pace of play? If Canada can find a way to put the U.S. on their heels like Finland did, I have to think Canada's going to take it. But at the same time, the Canada plays a defensive style for the most part similar to Finland. Are they going to have a better chance against the U.S.? Time will tell there. It's just one of those games that was very interesting to watch both ways. And it wasn't like this was probably the game of the day, maybe. But we have 4 games today. 4, right? 4. All 4 games today were, in my eyes, probably the best hockey we've seen at this tournament, right? And I keep saying that, right? We keep having the new game of the tournament, right? We think back a couple days ago when Latvia beat Canada. In my eyes, that was the game of the tournament, right? Underdog team knocks off Canada. Then we have Finland playing an outstanding game against the U.S. Once again, probably one of the games of the tournament, right? You have, the Czech-Slovak game today, which we'll talk about now, which was a 4-2 victory for Czechia. But really, 5-minute major right at the end of the game. Sort of giving Slovakia a chance to get back in. You take a second penalty, make it a 5-on-3. Slovakia scores. Then all of a sudden it's a 4-2 hockey game, right? And then everything just falls down and you have to play that defensive style that the Czechs are so good at. Slovakia tries to put the puck in, can't on the power play, and sure enough, the Czechs win this game 4-2. And it's just time after time, and this day especially has been a tremendous day of hockey where there are no guarantees in this sport. The Czechs dominated for the first period, dominated the second period, looked really good doing it, dominating up until basically 10 minutes in the third, and then they took a penalty. And then all of a sudden it was like, okay, hold up, hold your horses. This game is actually going to become a game. And we see it, right? With the Czechs basically holding on for dear life as they try and kill off a 5-minute penalty. The Slovaks score once, very well could have scored twice, 2 times or 3 times, made this game a tie game, forced it to overtime. But as we talked about yesterday, 2 teams very proud of their defense, and that's where they stick a lot of their time, right? And especially in practices, is their ability to protect the middle of the ice. And we saw that today with the Czechs and the Slovaks. A tight game right to the very end, 4-2, defensive-minded game, exactly what you want to see out of these 2 teams. And sure enough, Czechs 4, Slovaks 2 is your final here. And we'll move on to the next one now because, it's just been a great day of hockey, right? It's the World Juniors, right? It's the epitome of what the World Juniors is the best young players coming to play for their countries in a tournament that anyone can win anything, right? And some teams win games that they need to win. Some teams win it all because that's the one that they have to win. And for Germany, the one thing I will say is that this German team, has been absolutely robbed at this tournament, right? You see a 3-0 victory today for Canada. Okay, sure. But let's talk about Germany for a second, right? Because this German team has been, in my eyes, hands down one of the best teams so far that we've seen as an underdog. You think back to their very first game against the US, right? They played Finland, held Finland to a 3-1 victory. They held the US to 3-2 going in halfway through the second. They held Canada to a 2-0 game. The third goal was scored, I think, 2 seconds left. So really a 2-0 game. And that second goal, right, was a bank shot off the back of the boards, hitting a goalie, the lucky bounce at that. So, for this German team, it's been a good tournament. They just haven't had the results. And you think about what they're going to need to do, and we'll talk about this in a little bit when it comes to the relegation match. When they play Latvia tomorrow, I'm still thinking Germany's going to win it. And, yes, Latvia's played great. They've had some seriously good games. They've played two teams, two of the best teams, supposedly two of the best teams at this tournament with Canada and the US. They beat Canada. They held the US to a very good margin. But at the same time, Germany is just, they've played really good hockey. They just haven't had the results that they're looking for. And, one of the biggest problems with the reason why Latvia beat Canada and the reason why Latvia held the US so close is that both those teams make a lot of mistakes. The Germans don't make that many mistakes, right? They play a very structured game, and they make sure that if they're going to score, they're going to be able to do it, in a manner that they're not going to put themselves at risk of getting one in their own net, which is why they've been also so successful at this tournament. You can ignore the back half of that third period of that first game against the US, right? Because that game kind of got out of hand quickly, and then the Germans had to play from behind. If any team that plays from behind in the European style of that trap style is going to struggle, because it's hard to play defensive hockey when you don't have the lead, right? Because eventually you're going to have to play offensive. Unfortunately for the Germans, they came out too early in that offensive style and eventually got scored on because the US is so good in terms of their talent. Where Latvia has really surprised me just how committed they are. And that's one of the biggest problems. That's why Canada lost, is because they didn't realize that Latvia isn't going to move away from their tactical advantage, right? And they're going to accept the fact that if they lose, they're going to lose, and they're going to keep it close in a respectful fashion. So, for Canada, if you just, play that game out, don't take the dumb penalties, you probably win that game, 9.5 times out of 10. But it's when you start making those mistakes is when you start to lose games. And that's the biggest problem for Canada, is understanding when you're up, understand the situation around you and what the other team's doing, because the more you try and force stuff, the more problems you're going to have, especially against these European trap styles. And we saw that today in the game today, right, where Canada started to get desperate, especially towards that third period. First period, really, really good. We finally saw the power play work again. They made the changes. They put Dickinson on the power play. They put Bonk in the bumper where he's so used to playing with London. And finally we got that power play goal. Yes, they scored one late in the game against Latvia, but we finally get an actual good-looking power play. So finally, right, check mark. First goal of the game, great. 1-0 Canada. Everything looks good. And then all of a sudden the second period rolls around, and I don't know if they turned the switch off. I don't know if the crowd wasn't good enough. I don't know what it was, right? Where Canada just looked as flat as all can be. And, Germany, credit to them, had a better period than Canada did in the second. And honestly, I was talking with the people around me in my section that we're sitting in, and we were all like, are we going to witness another Latvia, right? 1-0 going into the third. Sound familiar? Feels like deja vu again, right? Where, a tight checking game, Canada starts to get desperate, and then Canada comes out and they play really, really well. But the problem when they play really, really well is that they tend to give up mistakes. And they did. All credit to them, they did, right? But Carter George was excellent tonight with the shutout. 3-0 was your final, of course. So in the long run, you get a lucky goal, finally scored a 5-on-5 goal. Sure, great. Now it's a matter of what are you going to do against the actual team, the actual probably best team you're going to face in your group, yet, you've lost to Latvia, you played terribly against Germany. Finland, you played pretty good against. Now it's a matter of what you're going to see against the U.S., and the U.S. is struggling. So I don't know, right? I don't know what we're seeing on New Year's. We'll break that one down tomorrow because there'll be a lot more to talk about. In terms of the upcoming schedule with all the sort of what ifs. We'll talk about that tomorrow because we are running a little bit short on this video. We're trying to keep it under 20 minutes, but looking at it right now, probably not going to happen. So move over to the news with Sweden. So the good, the bad, and for Switzerland, the ugly. In this game, the Swedes played a good game at moments. They played a bad game at moments, especially towards the end of the third. For Switzerland, it was ugly, right? And it was just an unfortunate game where Switzerland had every opportunity to get back into this one, but unfortunately could not. And for Sweden, they had enough of a lead early to be able to take this one. But really, every step of the way, Sweden did not look like the better team at moments in this game. And Switzerland has had a very good tournament with nothing to show for it. Very similarly to Germany, right? Where they played a good game against the Czechs, got beat 5-1. They played a good game against Slovakia, lost, right? And it's kind of this constant cycle where every time Switzerland plays good, they just lose. And hopefully we'll see them. Obviously, they play a big game on New Year's Eve as well against Kazakhstan to determine their relegation spot. But assuming they win, which I expect them to, it's not an easy quarterfinal opponent. They've played really well so far in this tournament, and they've sort of emerged themselves as a team that, in my eyes, is bound for an upset. They've played really good hockey. They just haven't quite had the results. So one thing I will say is don't count out Switzerland. Sweden, they've played well enough to win. So 3 points is 3 points. Don't ask how, but just how many. And that's sort of the theme today. And then the third piece of news today is the dark horse number one, and that's Finland. We talked about them in our preview. They're a team that always just seems to be looming, and you let them into games early. You don't take them out. You don't take them out in the second. You let them hang around to the third. You're going to have some problems. And I think Canada made a real good job of that right off the top. Is they played Finland really hard, and they played Finland really well. And the U.S. is struggling, especially on the defensive side with their defensive woes, but also in their physicality. And they've struggled with that all tournament long, is playing tight in those corners, but also being on the physical side on their defensive end, being on the physical side on the offensive end. And Finland exploited that basically the entire game today because they just played in the corners. And that's what Finland does. They're going to burn you. They're going to beat you on the wings. They're going to beat you on the power play. That's the trick for Finland, is just kind of hang around until you score a goal. And then all of a sudden, if you're the U.S. and you have to score on Finland, they're going to let them come to you. And if you make a mistake, it's probably in the back of your net, right? So for Finland, for the U.S., okay today. Nothing really hurts them in the standings. We'll talk about the standings in a little bit. But the other ones, and of course, Czechia, dark horse number 2. And they've, in my eyes, been the only team that has actually performed to their expectations so far in this tournament, if not exceeded them. Maybe Kazakhstan, because, they were kind of write-offs in this tournament. But they're the only team in this tournament that's actually played to the level that they're supposed to, right? Switzerland, in my eyes, has outperformed what they were expected to do. Yes, they've lost, but they've played well. Slovakia, sort of similar. They've played decent enough to get where they are, but they have played really well, just haven't quite got the results. Czechia, similar. They've got the results, but haven't quite got to where they need to. And we'll see. We'll see them against the Swedes, and that's going to be the game that's really, in my eyes, going to test them. And then the other one, the comeback for Slovakia, just not enough. And this is sort of the whole motto of Slovakia, right? They're going to play their defensive style until they're going to get an opportunity. They're going to score. If they're going to beat an upset team, and 4-2, right? 4-2 still is a good margin. We talked about it yesterday. I think we had them 3-1. But Slovakia and the Czechs are two teams playing very defensive hockey. And when Slovakia ends up playing, depending on where they seed in, you could see them playing Canada, you can see them playing the US, you can see them playing Finland, you can see them playing, for all we know, Latvia, for all we know, Germany, right? It could be any one of those teams. I'd be more than willing for Slovakia to take any of those matchups, because right now, we've seen the US, we've seen Canada struggle so much with their trap and that European style. Slovakia is not a write-off in this one either, and they're backed by good goaltending. So we'll see sort of what goes on there. Slovakia has a big game tomorrow against Kazakhstan, expect to win. But you really never know, right? At this tournament, I think I've said it 4 or 5 times so far and been wrong. So we'll see. For Canada, this team, I have nothing to say about Canada. I can't put words to it, right? Because I don't think anyone can put words to it. They finally score a 5-on-5 goal. They didn't score any against Latvia. I don't know, right? 2 of the arguably worst teams at this tournament, they struggle against, yet they beat one of the better teams in Finland. So I don't know. Let's talk about this one tomorrow. I can't put words to Canada. I just don't know, because they're just a team that makes no sense in this tournament. They're one of the best on paper, and they're one of the worst when they actually play hockey. For Germany, the one that matters. And now we will talk about the standings first, because remember, there is a game tomorrow. There's 2 games tomorrow. First, Kazakhstan and Slovakia, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Latvia and Germany. And Latvia and Germany is the big one, right? So for Germany, we look at the standings here, right? US, Canada, top 2, 7 points each. Finland now in 3rd place with 5 points. Latvia in 4th place with 2 points. Germany in last place with 3 regulation losses, right? So here's the kicker for Germany, right? They need a regulation win tomorrow against Latvia. And I mean, this has been the one that matters for Germany this entire tournament, right? This has been the key to success, right? Is beating Latvia and winning the game that matters. Sure, you're gonna have to play a tough opponent, probably Sweden or the Czechs in that quarterfinal round, but at this point, I don't think you care who you play. I think you just want to make sure you don't have to play Kazakhstan in a winner-take-all relegation game. So for Germany, winning the game that matters here, they have to win in regulation. If they don't win in regulation, Latvia is automatically promoted, or not promoted, but they'll automatically make the quarterfinals, with Germany going to the relegation game. But here's the real kicker, right, is Latvia plays a game against Finland on the 31st, which means even if Germany wins their game in regulation, Latvia still has the potential to not be in that relegation game and to make the quarterfinals, and even more exciting, to do something in them, right? Because we've seen Sweden struggle, we've seen Czechs, they play pretty well, and then the rest of the group, who knows, right? But if Latvia can win, it'll make everything a lot easier in terms of the standings, which we'll break down tomorrow with all the what-ifs for the December 31st games, but that'll be tomorrow, because we need to wait on this Latvia-Germany game to sort of determine what's going on with the relegation. And then we move over to Group B, right, where we have Sweden and Czechia, both with 9 points. Slovakia in 3rd place with 3, Kazakhstan 2 regulation losses, and Switzerland with 3 regulation losses. So for Kazakhstan, if they can beat Slovakia, it's a big win, but really doesn't mean too much in terms of the standings, aside from they might get to avoid that overtime. If they make it to overtime against the Swiss, they'll probably be safe. But they also sort of enter that 3-way tiebreaker, because if Kazakhstan can somehow beat out Slovaks, then all of a sudden you have likely going to become a 3-way tiebreaker, assuming the Swiss beat Kazakhstan, which would be honestly crazy. But at the same time, we're going to keep it realistic here. We're going to take Slovakia by pretty good of a margin, so I don't think that'll be too much. As we flip it over now to tomorrow's games, right, where we have two on the plate. We sort of talked about them. Slovakia, Kazakhstan. Expect Slovakia to take this one. And then Germany and Latvia. And this is 2 teams that, Latvia's high off success. Germany has played really well in this tournament, just haven't quite got the results. And, you think back to a couple of years ago, or I guess last year, because that was only last year, right, where Germany beat Finland, right? First time in their history, or first time in however many years, beating Finland. And then all of a sudden, right, Latvia plays Germany in the game that matters. And what happens? Latvia smokes them, right? But now there's a whole new, like you look at it, right? It's completely flipped this year, where we have Germany, who hasn't won anything yet to this point, and Latvia, who's coming off high success against Canada. The game that matters. Remember, that's the key to this tournament, is the game that matters for each team. The game that matters for Germany, for Latvia, is tomorrow. It's going to be a good one. I don't have too much of a prediction for this one. I'm still going to stick with the one I made at the start of the tournament with Germany, but really could go either way. Yes, Latvia's played good. Germany's played good as well. Going to come down to the wire. I'm very curious to see what it is. But now it's time for live questions. So remember back a couple days ago, we threw out a poll. Did it again today on the fly 1515 on Twitter. So be sure to follow us over there. We posted basically a question period at the end of every game every day to be featured in a video. So be sure to go over there, hit the follow button, hit the notification bell so you're notified when we post that, and then leave a comment down below if you want to appear in one of these videos. But today we start off with a question, or more of a thought from Nick_DECE, who says, first off, this tournament rules. And yes, it does. Second part, Czechia is extremely legitimate. They roll 4 lines and their transition game is lethal. Finland lulls everyone into a false sense of security is his third point. And yes, absolutely, right? First off, yes, this tournament is amazing. Drives me nuts, but it's amazing. Look, we're already at 25 minutes and we've been trying to keep it under 20 for this, but unfortunately I talk too much. So second part, Czechia is extremely legitimate. And yes, they are. You know, they've surprised me at this tournament, I have to say. I wasn't expecting them to be this good. And it's not necessarily how good they've been. It's the way that they're playing games and they're winning games. And as much as, you know, the one thing I will say is they play Kazakhstan, right? And it's hard to sort of draw conclusions based off games against teams like Kazakhstan because you really don't know what they're expecting. When you see Kazakhstan play Sweden, and Sweden doesn't struggle, but you know, they're not playing their game, and Kazakhstan sort of disrupting it a little bit. You see the Czechs sort of roll them over in the second period and then play pass around for the third. You know, it's interesting, right? And I think the Czechs are that one team that just sort of looks good right now, and sort of that leading dark horse, right? The same with Finland, right? They've played interesting games at this tournament, but they've played good games and they play their style. They know how to win games, and that's the key for teams like Czechia, for teams like Finland, right? Where they're not going to blow you away on the stat sheet. They're not the US, they're not Canada, they're not Sweden. They're not going to blow you away on paper, but they are going to win hockey games the right way. So, you know, Czechia is an extremely dangerous team in this tournament, so definitely don't count them out. You know, I had them at the start of the tournament in second spot. I still think that's the case, but you never know, right? You don't know in this tournament until it's done. And I think this tournament especially has been a very good indicator of that. You know, the Finland game, I don't think many people had the Finns beating the US. I know we talked about it, that, you know, if the Finland was going to win, it'd be sort of in that fashion, a tight checking game right to the end. But still, you know, you have to work logically, and the logical move would have been to pick the US, right? But nonetheless, right, Finland lulls everyone into a false sense of security, works right into that third point, you know, where the Finns have had a rough tournament start. You know, they lost to Canada opening night. They played a pretty mediocre game against Germany, wasn't great, and then they come out and they beat the US, right? It just comes back to that old adage of what the heck happens at this tournament. It's just the most wonderful time of the year because truly anything can happen. And then our second one is from Kenny Kaminsky, who says, Canada terrible offense versus USA's awful defense will be fun to watch. And I mean, absolutely it's gonna be, right? You know, they're one of those two teams that they need the win, and the winner will win Group A. Just like we predicted at the very start, it's gonna come down to New Year's. But at the same time, I don't think anyone predicted it to be just like this. And the other thing I will mention is, likely, assuming everything sort of works out as it should, the loser of that game will most likely end up being the third spot, having to play either the Czechs or the Swedes. So a lot on the line for Canada and the US in that game not to lose. Although there is the potential for them to basically move it to overtime and then they'll be okay. But once again, talk about that tomorrow. We're already pushing it for time as it is. But we will move on here to the third comment, which is from Nick, the IIHF fan, who says, there are 3 teams I feel the need to call out today. First, our Canadians. There was one point in the game where someone on the broadcast had mentioned that Canada had double the ozone time that Germany did, which is great until you remember that the shots were, I believe, 23-21 Canada at one point. If you have that much more time in the offensive zone, but the shots are still even, that doesn't seem ideal. Canada would outshoot Germany 13-4 after this point and broke a 184-minute, 48-second drought of no even strength goals. So it seems like they woke up, ? Second, I can't imagine either participant in that Switzerland-Sweden game is happy with how it turned out. First, Sweden, especially in that third period, letting your discipline slip to the point where you're giving your opponents 5 power plays in one period is asking for trouble. And Switzerland scored on 4 of them. That said, Switzerland can only blame themselves for putting themselves in a position where such a comeback was necessary. They outshot Sweden 11-5 in the first, but Sweden scored on 3 of their 5. So, yes, right? It was an interesting day of hockey and lots to talk about, right? Where, the Canadians had a rough game today, and there's no getting around that, but it was progress in my eyes from what we saw against Latvia, where they didn't necessarily push the pace to the point where they were desperate. Latvia, they did even when they were up. They were just looking for points, and unfortunately that cost them in the long run, right? Those penalties, sure, there was a couple bad penalties towards the end of this game too, but at the same time, Canada was much more disciplined today than they were. As for the Switzerland-Sweden game, sort of already talked about that with the discipline issues. You're kind of looking and expecting them to be a lot better there. But nonetheless, that's what we got for that. If you haven't made it this far in the video, thank you for watching. If you'd like to drop a like, if you like, consider subscribing. Tell all your friends, comment down below your thoughts on day 4 of the World Junior Championship. Until next time, see ya.